the progressive Wellesian state. Relatively few individuals today would proudly identify as fascist. This was not always so, for before and during the 1930s, the term fascist had nowhere near the stigma that it does today, and many were enamored by and embraced concepts of fascism. It was the woke of its day. One famous individual who embraced a mix of fascism and progressive liberalism was H.G. Wells. Before Hitler and Mussolini brought infamy to the term fascism, Wells referred to himself as a liberal fascist. He put forward a theory of revolutionary practice centered around a concept he described as liberal fascism. The end result envisioned was a group of authoritarian elitists, a benevolent oligarchy of the wisest, ruling over a global liberal utopia, supposedly for the benefit of mankind. Although extremists today in large reject any connection with fascism, in actuality what they reject is old terminologies and passé applications. For the theories of fascism need not proclaim the dogmas of Nazism, but the methods used. Foundational concepts of fascism, presented under different names, can appear as an opposing ideology while furthering the same social structures. Indeed, one may even call himself an anti-fascist and embrace the modus operandi of fascism. When analyzing the ideas and philosophies of the modern progressive movement, if in comparison we look back at Wells's concept of liberal fascism, we have a close match indeed. Yes, Wells's liberal fascism is still alive, but that is not what it is called. It is called progressive, or woke. The modern progressive movement today is the result of an evolution of socialist thought. We can trace its roots further back, but it begins to evolve into what now has become a contemporary culture around the turn of the 19th century with the introduction of Darwinism and eugenics. With advancements in communication, global commerce, transportation, modern technologies, economics, and so on, the cosmopolitan ideology spread worldwide and became a universal train of thought in many circles. Here I focus on H.G. Wells due to his prolific writings, which serve as a basic cumulative representation of philosophies embraced by like-minded contemporaries who are the fathers of modern fascism. But Wells was also a visionary, being recognized as a prophetic, imaginative social reformer, a man ahead of his time. And if modern liberalism is a religion, H.G. Wells is one of its prophets. It is evident in reading Wells's books, there is an uncanny accuracy in discussion of modern trends, which have been fulfilled until our time. Our most astounding foresight is in Wells's novel, The World Set Free, published in 1914. Here he discusses a future war involving nuclear weaponry, which includes an excellent description of a chain reaction, even going so far as to use the term atomic bombs. This led Wells to becoming part of a self-fulfilling prophecy, for in 1932, physicist Leo Szilard read Wells's book. He then conceived the idea of a nuclear chain reaction in 1933 and filed for patents in 1934. In an article which appeared in the November 28, 2005 issue of The New Yorker, entitled Imagining the Worst, How a Literary Genre Anticipated the Modern World, author Tom Rees wrote the following about Wells's book. When the book appeared, no physicist thought that an artificially induced chain reaction, which Wells called the disease of matter, was possible. Wells based the science in his story on research by the British physicist Frederick Soddy and Ernest Rutherford, both of whom dismissed the idea. Rutherford called it moonshine. In 1932, however, Leo Szilard, a Hungarian physicist working at the Institute of Theoretical Physics in Berlin, read the novel in a German translation. The following year, while on a walk in London, Szilard had an epiphany in which he conceived how a nuclear weapon might actually be built. He subsequently sent the first chapter of Wells's book to Sir Hugo Hurst, the founder of British General Electric, accompanied by a letter in which he wrote, The forecast of the writers may prove to be more accurate than the forecast of the scientists. The physicists have conclusive arguments as to why we cannot create at present new sources of energy. I am not so sure whether they do not miss the point. The book's main character is the nuclear chain reaction itself, a phenomenon portrayed in such intimate and creepy detail that it seems almost like a living thing. The last part of the book takes place in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, where most of the capital cities of the world were burning. Millions of people had already perished, and over great areas government was at an end. Not only did Wells have the distinction of publishing a book containing a detailed conception of nuclear energy in 1914, a passage from that book immediately brings to mind the concept of nuclear suitcase devices. Even before World War I, Wells wrote, "All through the 19th and 20th centuries, the amount of energy that men were able to command was continually increasing. Destruction was becoming so facile that any little body of malcontents could use it. It was revolutionizing the problems of police and internal rule. Before the last war began, it was a matter of common knowledge that a man could carry about in a handbag an amount of latent energy sufficient to wreck half a city." After this, Wells immediately began to work on another book entitled The Last War. In this work, the world is brought to the utter brink of total destruction, at which point the remaining leadership in the world unites and finds overwhelming support with the Earth's war-weary population against those devoted to war. In the end, they create a global government to oversee the banning of war and nuclear weapons, and to work towards the perfection of an advanced liberal utopian society. This book is less of a science fiction novel than a propaganda booklet, created by Wells to shape worldviews and advance beliefs. This marked a distinct era in Wells' life, whereas before Wells had already established his recognition as a master of science fiction, with such works as The Time Machine, The Invisible Man, The War of the Worlds, and The Island of Dr. Moreau. From this point, Wells would become more of a social activist, concentrating his efforts on effecting global change. He wrote a collection of essays, books, and novels, which often began with the world rushing to catastrophe, until people realized a better way of living. The theme was consistent. First, destruction. Then in the end, current governmental systems are discarded. An international body is given absolute authority, which supersedes that of national governments. It is not surprising then to know that it was Wells who during World War I penned the propaganda slogan, "The war to end all war." He had hoped that a victory afterward would give birth to a world state. To this end, he became a member of the Research Committee for the League of Nations, believing it a beginning step to the fulfillment of his one-world vision. Wells was certain that the destruction of the world was inevitable in the future unless we dissolved the power of the war-natured nation-state and created a universal system of global order. He also outlined the blueprint to bring about a great reset, which he called The Open Conspiracy. He then published this in a book by the same name in 1928. It was Wells's blueprint for world revolution. At the crux of this open conspiracy was essentially the creation of a culture war. Wells envisioned a global movement consisting of loosely connected individuals, groups, governmental and non-governmental entities, and organizations, where those of every class who were sympathetic to the cause would unite and openly defy traditional values, ideas, heritage, and established institutions. The open conspiracy was Wells's call to society to openly and publicly commit mass treason. This postmodern cultural movement was to gradually change the world systems of government, eventually placing them under global jurisdiction. The Open Conspiracy was followed by numerous other works promoting his ideas, including a book published in 1940 entitled The New World Order. Here Wells states that global socialism is inevitable and that there would be a tumultuous transition period as it approached. To quote Wells, "When the struggle seems to be drifting definitely towards a world social democracy, There may still be very great delays and disappointments before it becomes an efficient and beneficent world system. Countless people will hate the New World Order and will die protesting it. When we attempt to evaluate its promise, we have to bear in mind the distress of a generation or so of malcontents, many of them quite gallant and graceful-looking people. A number of other quotes found in Wells' writing were assembled by Dennis Cuddy, Ph.D. These quotations contain the crux of Wells's blueprint to save humanity, which at present is being largely followed. Wells wrote, "The political world of the open conspiracy must weaken, efface, incorporate, and supersede existing government. The open conspiracy is the natural inheritor of socialist and communist enthusiasms. It may be in control of Moscow before it is in control of New York. The character of the open conspiracy will now plainly be displayed. It will be a world religion. This large, loose, assimilatory mass of groups and societies will be definitely and obviously attempting to swallow up the entire population of the world and become the new human community." What Wells was calling for at least 100 years ago was a great reset. In his 1933 book, The Shape of Things to Come, Wells predicted a Second World War. It would begin about 1940, originating from a German-Polish dispute. Wells believed that after 1945, there would be an increasing lack of public safety in criminally infected areas. Eventually, the plan for the modern world state would succeed on its third attempt. It seems notable that there has already been 2 failed attempts to create a world government, beginning with the League of Nations, 1919, then followed by the United Nations, 1945. Continuing Cuddy's chronicle of Wells's writings, Wells wrote, "The organization of this that I call the open conspiracy, which will ultimately supply teaching, coercive and directive public services to the whole world, is the immediately task before all rational people. A planned world state is appearing at 1,000 points. When accident finally precipitates it, its coming is likely to happen very quickly. Sometimes I feel that generations of propaganda and education may have to precede it. As plans for political synthesis seem to grow bolder and more extensive, there must be a common faith and law for mankind. The main battle is an educational battle." To this end, Wells wrote a collection of essays which were compiled in a book he would call World Brain. Wells described his vision of the world brain as a new, free, synthetic, authoritative, permanent world encyclopedia that could help world citizens. Wells envisioned a world state indoctrination program, wherein all information was controlled and sanctioned by the state. Today, with inventions of AI and the Internet, we are finally crossing the Rubicon of digital slavery. Conclusion. Wells's ability to foresee the shape of things to come was in some instances uncanny. Not only was he able to envision progress, social trends, and advancements in modern technologies, he also possessed an awareness of the potential dangers which these new sources of power would pose as they were developed. In the end, however, all Wells had to offer for the salvation of the world was soft tyranny, a global society ruled by an oligarchy of philosopher kings. As with Wells, his present-day counterparts seek to establish a global system of government, imagining to control destiny. Holding an absolute faith in their materialistic reasoning and moral superiority, modern-day social engineers attempt to apply what they believe to be rational solutions to an irrational world ruled by autocrats who disregard all reasoning but their own. However, in the battle for the destiny of mankind, history has always come back to triumph over fanciful reasoning. H.G. Wells, a devout atheist and ardent evolutionist, passionately embraced the idea that man was ever evolving upwards. His mentor, Thomas Henry Huxley, was his biology instructor. Huxley, known as Darwin's bulldog, persuaded Darwin to pen the theory of evolution, which had shaped his mind for years. Darwin also held the notion that the human mind would eventually develop into a god as a result of evolution. Toward the end of his life, before the end of the war in Europe, Wells had become disillusioned and despondent. He had concluded that human existence was destined to be extinguished, with virtually little or no hope at all of escape. By this time, the war was ending and the world was wrapping up another bloody bout of progress. Later that same year, Wells would live to see Hiroshima and Nagasaki become a prelude into the future he had imagined 31 years prior. He died August 13, 1946. Nonetheless, the Wellsian dream marches on intact, constantly evolving and morphing and adapting to an ever-changing world in a modern age. For unto the present, the basic concept of Wells's liberal fascism is embraced still, even if only by other new names.